Today, we are going to be talking about a topic that a lot of runners are curious about, but not a lot of people talk about. We are going to be discussing why some athletes never reach their full potential and what sets apart these athletes that break through and reach very high levels in their running. Have you ever wondered why some athletes are better than others? Why does it seem like some people have more natural ability? Is more natural talent or genetics, or is it hard work that sets these athletes apart? Today, we wanted to chat about this topic and uncover what we see as coaches. We've been Jason has been coaching for 12 years, and I have been coaching athletes for 7 years. And there are some patterns that we recognize. And a lot of the times people want to know, how can I be that person that shaves an hour off my marathon? How can I be that person that went from a smoker to a Boston qualifier? How can I be that person that totally changes my life and becomes an athlete and really reaches a high level with my training? And so we wanted to talk about the common things that we see in athletes who really do reach that next level. And we want to talk about the topic of how fast can you become with your potential and how much of that is natural talent. And I do find this conversation to be rather interesting because Jason has been running since he was 12 years old, and now he is in his late 30s or mid 30s, and he might admit that some of his running that he has done is a lot of natural talent, but then there has to be that hard work that is coupled with running in order to actually reach your potential. So Jason, talk to me a little bit about your running background and what sort of things you think played a role in your success as an athlete, because I know you have had a mile PR of 4:14, which is relatively fast. I mean, it's not like you were, the fastest person by any means, but someone who's reached that level. What sort of things do you think have played into your success as a runner?
Yeah, I think my background is probably different than most adult runners. Most adult runners, I think, at races, a lot of them don't have a background in cross country and track growing up. They start running later in adulthood for various reasons, and that's kind of their go-to form of exercise, and they find that it's a good way to challenge themselves. I kind of discovered, back as a kid, I wasn't super talented in the team sports, but in Phi Ed class, I was one of the faster kids in the presidential fitness test for the mile. So I did track in 6th grade, I think was the first year it was offered, and then 7th and 8th grade as well. And then when I got to high school, I'd learned out what cross country was. And so, each year I was training for about, 3 months, and training at that level as a kid, who's 10, 11, 12 years old. It's not to extent, but at least you're out there running a mile to anywhere from 1 to 3 miles total. And so, I think my childhood prior to that, I was always super active. So always out and about in the neighborhood, playing games, playing soccer, running around, playing tag. And I think that kind of gave me a good aerobic foundation, or kind of helped me work on my endurance so that I could handle running a 650 mile or whatever in 6th grade. And so as I kind of progressed into high school and I started increasing my run distance, to 4, 5, 6 miles, that's really when I started to see, improvements in my time start to drop. And I think that as I got into college, you mentioned the 4:14 mile, thinking about that took a good 10 solid years of hard work and just consistency. So, by the time you get to high school, you're training more than just 3 months a year. You're probably spending about 9 months training. And then in college, it's even more than that. You're basically training 11 months of the year. You're only taking short, 1 to 2 week breaks throughout the year. And so I think just over time, the compiled training starts to add up.
Yeah, what I really find interesting about your story, some people I think like to grab onto he was the fastest person in gym class, he has natural talent, because when you line up a bunch of kids who are, 10 years old, and to be one of the fastest, if not the fastest, and that's how you start your running career, a lot of people want to write that off and say, well, you know what? I was last in the presidential mile, so a 4:14 mile for me is just not a possibility. So do you think that there are some people maybe who are in your gym class or who are, one of the people who fall in the middle of the pack or the end of the pack naturally who can maybe outwork someone like you? Or do you think that that gym class where you came in second, do you think that was just like your genetic gift, or was there anything that separated you?
I mean, I definitely think that genetics played some role. I know that my dad was fairly athletic and his dad as well. So, there was a long line down the list of fairly talented, in whatever sport it was, whether it was just being out and about and constantly, enjoying the activity. And I think that's what it boiled down to is, liking the satisfaction you get out of hard work. And so putting in the effort, just being out there for 1 to 2 hours, playing whatever. And I think that, there are kids that I got to be teammates with in college who I know for a fact weren't as talented as me. They really had to work harder to run like similar times. They were running probably a lot higher mileage or just like pushing the pace more frequently. Whereas I could get away with running maybe like half the mileage or, a pretty smaller chunk. So that's where I started to discover that, hard work could really help kind of level the playing field if you're willing to like rise up to that level.
Yeah, that's really interesting, talking about the different mileage that some of the people you needed to, or some of the people on your team who needed to compete at a high level, they needed to run more mileage than you. And sometimes people would say that, that alludes to like you having more natural talent than this other person. And it's hard to really say, right? But I know sometimes people will look at, the super competitive runners out there who are running, Olympic trials qualifying times, or the people who are winning marathons, and they'll say, I don't look like them, or I'm not built like them. Or, when you look at a lot of like the Kenyan runners, I know that might sound stereotypical, but they are really fast. So why do you think it is that there are certain populations or like a certain look to what makes like a fast runner? Or do you think that that's a result of them running so much?
Yeah, I mean, to get to that high of a level, most of them started, when they were pretty young, right? So they probably did discover that they, had endurance or were at least fast in a short distance race. And so I think genetics played a role there, and then also maybe just their lifestyle. So what they were exposed to as kids. I know a lot of the African kids, they grew up in villages where that's just kind of the norm. Is like that's a form of exercise, or they run from like one area to the next. And so I think that it's all about kind of your environment and who's around you. And we see it every year with high schools programs that are well more established than a lot of like rural, smaller areas where, they might be scrambling to even find someone to coach the team. And most kids don't even know what the sport of cross country is or how far they're running. And so I think a lot of it boils down to, the establishment in that area.
Yeah, I do find that really interesting, thinking of, a lot of the great Kenyan runners or people in the Africa area. I do think that that's a prevalent sport that they play, and it's really something that people pride themselves on, and it's like their big sport. Same with a lot of soccer, right? In a lot of parts of the world, soccer is very popular. And in America, it's not as popular. And I've heard this analogy before where people say, how come the United States of America has so many great football players, right? Like
Right.
our sort of football, right? Like touchdowns and that sort of football. When the rest of the world, they could never compete with the NFL. And the reason being is that our culture values football. So from a very early age, boys are thinking, oh, I want to be a football player. They see football. They see that it's valued in our culture. And so the capitalization on our whole population, more people play football. And therefore, the more people who play football, the more chance that you are to be able to select those people who work really hard, or to be able to have the special, genetic gifts and pair those things together to reach these really high level football players. Where in other countries where football is not really a big part of their culture, there's not a lot of programs,
Right.
and you're not getting a lot of people who reach a high level. There's not a lot of competition. But that's what makes, the NFL like so great, is that we have all of these football programs. It's very highly valued in our culture. Whereas I think distance running, for example, in our culture, I mean, at least when I was growing up, it wasn't the thing to do, right? Like you didn't go out for cross country. The super popular kids like didn't do cross country. And I know that's very stereotypical, but I'm just being really realistic here. I mean, you grew up in middle school and high school, college. As a cross country and track athlete, what was your experience in terms of like what sort of athletes did cross country and track? And do you think out of everyone in your high school or college, if some of the players who were focused on football or focused on, hockey, if they would have been cross country athletes, do you think that maybe your team would have been faster? Do you think that maybe there would be a lot more competition out there if these super athletic guys who were doing other sports that maybe our culture values a little bit more went out for cross country?
It's definitely a fun topic to discuss and unpack, right? And you mentioned soccer, how it's just not as developed here with youth programming and all of that, because there are so many other sports like football and basketball and hockey even. And so yeah, I definitely think, as I got older, I realized a lot of the kids in gym class, it didn't matter what sport we were playing. A lot of them were let's say it's ultimate frisbee where there are no actual established teams, or at least there weren't at the time. The football players, the baseball players, it was basically, if you were on a sport, it didn't really matter the sport. You were kind of the ones that were doing better in the game. And I think that's where they started to see he's a runner, but he can still be really effective at this game, and he brings different strengths, right? So he can outrun people, he can get open, that sort of thing. And I just think that if people would have at an early age shown an interest or been put in a different sport, I definitely think that they could have been probably grown into something special in terms of producing at that sport as well. And so for example, our high school team, we had a very good basketball, hockey, and football program. And so some of those top athletes decided to run track or cross country. I know for a fact we could have been state championship team. So there's an old quote that I remember we used to say is that every large high school in the metro area has a state cross country team. In the student body, you just gotta. It's a matter of finding the right talent, getting them out, and keeping them out. That's really what it boils down to. You'd have to find these kids as young age and get them out running. And a lot of times it's obviously not gonna happen. You're not gonna pull kids out of other sports, but definitely fun to think about. And I know I listened to a podcast way back when about LeBron James, if he would have pursued a different sport football, how good could he have been? Or Usain Bolt, obviously. So it is always fun to think about. Usain Bolt, I know he a while back was actually talking about going out for football and doing kick returner just because of his speed. And so definitely fun topic. And I think that no matter what you do, if you start at a young age, you're obviously setting yourself up for success. You're kind of getting ahead of the game, I guess, so to speak. But the beauty with our sport is that you can get pretty close to your potential. It's just going to take you longer, and you have to be super patient over time.
Yes, I definitely think this conversation is very interesting. Thinking about, what if, the greatest in NFL were actually went out for cross country, right? Or what if the greatest soccer players that our nation had were cross country runners? And we're never going to know the answer to that. But then some people maybe listening are thinking, well, it's because they're super talented. But in reality, I do think, yes, there's talent there, but they also have that work ethic that you need. And since the United States has so many different sports opportunities, I mean, we have young kids, so we get the pamphlet, right? It's you can sign your kid up for everything. I mean, it's tennis, golf, soccer, hockey. I mean, there's just so many options, which is great. But I think when we look at other countries, maybe we're talking Kenya, right? They are more, okay, you got soccer and you can run. And there's not a lot of opportunities to do things okay, we're going to go snowboarding and skiing and stuff like that. There's just not as many different opportunities. So more people are choosing to do sports like running. And so I'm thinking in the US, if it was really highly valued, we'd see that, hey, actually a lot of people who maybe don't think that they're talented at running actually do have a lot of talent. And the board would just be so wide. There'd be so many more people in the sport, and that would really open up kind of opportunity to see, what are the potential of, our population as a whole. But a lot of people, they're not into running. But segueing that to thinking about natural talent, I think that's something that a lot of people think that they don't have. And I know I kind of dropped it on you saying, you have natural talent, Jason. But I'm sure there have been times where you think that you don't have natural talent, because when you compare yourself to the greats, right? People who can break 4 in the mile, people just that you competed against in college. You must have thought, hey, these people are more talented than me. So how is a way that someone knows like if they have natural talent or not? And at what point, like, are you okay admitting like, hey, I might have some talent in this?
Oof, yeah, really good question. Obviously, you're gonna know when you put yourself out there and compete or run with other people. And so, no matter what sport it is, when you compete against others, it's hard to be the best, right? Like, there's very few people that can be the best in their game or in their specialty. So, I think that yeah, it's definitely humbling, but you start to realize that there's always people that are going to be better than you, and they're going to have more talent. And so, I think it's something that you gotta find out. You got to find goals that are meaningful to you, that you're not really comparing yourself to others, and they can't be really like, oh, I want to be, running this time in this event because this other person achieved it, and I know I beat him in a shorter distance. And I used to do that all the time. That was my thing, where I'd be able to beat people in track in the mile, but come cross country, I would kind of think that I could hang with them, but they were so far ahead. And a lot of that boiled down to maybe just they were put in higher mileage weeks in the summer, and they were a little bit more motivated. And it could have also been they were a little more talented in terms of just being able to sustain that pace, dealing with the threshold, the lactic acid buildup in their legs. And so I think a lot of that boiled down to, the work ethic, but also the factors, like the day-to-day factors. They're just doing things that I didn't even think I was capable of doing, really.
Yeah, the comparison trap can be so hard because I know you just mentioned, when you're in a race and someone beats you and, maybe you're thinking, oh, maybe they have a little bit more natural talent than me. That sort of thinking can, I think, be a little toxic for people. Whenever you're going to place a label on yourself, you really want to be careful with what that means, right? So if you're going to say to yourself, like I said, for many years, I said, I don't have any natural talent. What does that even mean, right? Like, why are we saying that? And you have to really be conscious of the labels that you put yourself under. So I said for many years, I don't have natural talent in the sport. And it almost handicapped me because what you think is what really happens in reality. So you might not pursue harder workouts. You might not pursue bigger goals because you think, oh, I don't have the talent. I'm not naturally talented. It won't come as easily to me as that person. It's not fair, poor me. And that sort of mindset is what starts to shift and to set apart people who maybe won't reach their potential and maybe will. So I don't think that label is great. I know we kind of like set you up with the label of, oh, you have natural talent. And even if you say to yourself, hey, I'm naturally talented, I do think that can also be limiting in ways because maybe you think I don't have to work as hard, or maybe you think, oh, I'm so naturally talented, like I'm going to put in half the work, or I don't know what sort of negative consequences that it could have. But just being aware of what happens in your mind when you do say things like saying, I am talented, or I am not talented. I mean, these are things that like your body hears, your mind hears. And when you're in the middle of doing like mile repeats, you don't want to be thinking like, oh, I have no natural talent. I mean, that is not an uplifting thing to think about. So I know that you coach a ton of runners. I mean, you've been coaching for 12 years now, and I'm sure you have coached a lot of people who do not think that they have natural talent. They don't think they can achieve their goals. And that can be just such a huge barrier. So how do you talk people or walk people out of that mindset shift of like, oh, I can't do it, or, oh, I'm not naturally talented, I'll never be able to do it, where they're really down on themselves? And how do you get it so that they can see, hey, you might not like have that natural talent that you want to have. It might be a little harder than you thought, but you can put in the work, and your potential, even if you don't have this natural talent, is still way higher than what you think it is.
Yeah, we all react differently to different like training stimuli, and that's something as a coach you see. Like, you can see kids that maybe they hardly train at all, and then they start running, and their times just drop like crazy, right? And they basically get fit really quick. And then there's other kids that kind of just are at this like kind of middle level pretty much the entire season, and it's a lot harder to get them to kind of drop time. And so I think, yeah, those are the kids that you're talking about. Like, how do you keep them motivated, engaged, when they are seeing other kids maybe just improving and running PRs every race? And that is a challenge as a coach, but I think it's more you just have to be mindful of helping them see like, hey, each person is their own unique. It's just like learning anything. It's like learning math. Like you're all going to pick it up at different rates. Some people might struggle in algebra, but they might do better in geometry. Same with running. Like everyone's kind of got their own strength. You're all out here doing it. It's more about your own individual journey and setting goals that are, going to get you excited and attainable for you, because an attainable goal for you might look a lot different than it does for this other person, in terms of like dropping time. You can't just expect each person to drop a minute off their time. It might look a lot different depending on all the factors, including their experience and their current training. Another thing I wanted to mention, you kind of remind me of like people not knowing the label of like labeling people talent, right? Or like saying they have talent. My brother is an example of someone who probably could have been as good of a runner as I was, because he did run at a young age, and he ran a pretty fast time. He broke 5 minutes in the mile in high school and that sort of thing. And now as an adult, he doesn't really run much, but I'm sure there's people out there that really never got into running, right. And they're probably, they look at people who do run and they probably think like, oh, that person has more talent than me. But really it's not about that. It could just be like, they just never really got into the sport. Right. And so, that he's a perfect example. And obviously he's a lot taller than me, and he's got probably 50 pounds on me, but it's just one of those things, like you make that assumption, but people just really don't know how good they could have been. Right.
No, I love that, because for the longest time, I used to think I have no natural talent. I would label myself that. I said, I can't do this. I started wanting to run when I was like 16, 17 years old, because we would have to run 2 laps in gym class in order to, do our warm up for gym. And it was extremely embarrassing because I would come in last place. I had to like run, walk. I was wheezing. And I would see like these other girls, or the track cross country girls, they would like lap me in a two lap. I don't even know how, but I was just clearly not a good runner, right? In my opinion. And I really wanted to work on that, but I was handicapped by the fact that I kept telling myself, you don't have this natural talent, you're not like so-and-so on the cross-country team, and you have these labels in your head, and it's just like limiting beliefs. And so you really have to change your mindset and your beliefs about yourself and about what your abilities are. Because I didn't know, if you were to go back, it's like, you don't know what someone's upbringing is like. Like, you don't know, maybe that girl, started running when she was 3 years old with her mom outside, and maybe they had a really active childhood. Maybe people in their family run, like, you don't know. All I knew is my background, like no one in my family ran, right? Like I never participated in any sort of sports whatsoever. And so it's hard to say, oh, she doesn't have any natural talent, when in reality it's like, okay, she just had, maybe more privilege in that area of having a running background. But what I do find really interesting about this is later in life, it's like I started running more, and then I kind of got over that limiting belief, and I started allowing, that abundance mindset of like what is possible for me, and really pushing the limits. And I got to a point where I probably was faster than every girl who was, lapping me in the gym class in my late 20s. And even now, like as a mom of 2, it's like I am so much faster than I ever thought was physically possible for me. But if I would have stayed in that mindset of, you're not naturally talented, I would have never been able to find that out. And so we really have to be careful with labeling ourselves as like, oh, I'm not naturally talented like Jason, or I'm not naturally talented like so-and-so.
Right.
Or even people look at me now and they're like, naturally talented. I have people that follow me on Instagram and they're like, wait, you haven't been a runner your whole life? And it's like such a shock. And I'm like, no, I used to be a smoker. Like I used to smoke cigarettes. That's what I did in high school, right? Like I wasn't an athlete. And I didn't really become an athletic person or get into running until after college, right? When I had a desk job, when I wanted to make healthier changes, that's when I really got into running. But you would never know what your potential is if you're constantly labeling yourself as not talented. So I think stripping yourself of that label and realizing that just being a human, if you're an able-bodied human, right? Like, if you have legs that work and all of those things, you have a lot more potential than I think you're giving yourself credit for. And what I think you and I have discovered is, even with, your mile time that you ran, and even with, the 20 marathons I've done, and I've ran like a 3:13, I understand that my natural ability has only been like scratched the surface, right? Like if I really wanted to like get faster and reach like my full potential, it would just require more sacrifices on my part. And so a lot of people will say to me, oh, like I it's physically not possible. Like people in their 20s will be like, it's physically not possible for me to run faster than 10-minute pace. And it's like, well, I understand that maybe is the case now, but like, hey, if you really dedicated and if you were willing to like do all of the little things, that is not your set point, and that is not like what your limit is as an athlete.
Right. Wow, you said a lot of good things there. I had a lot of thoughts kind of popping in my mind, but those, the people that kind of grew up, maybe they played football or whatever in high school, they're the people that say, well, it's because I didn't run back then, so I have no talent in that. But really, it's like, how do you know? If you would have been doing that as a kid, you might have been good. Or who's to say if you don't start now, and like you said, if you're willing to put in work and sacrifice, you can see yourself get to a certain level. And I bet if you were to, look at, poll the participants at a certain marathon, like a large marathon, I bet you like 99% of them did not run in high school.
Right.
So I think that, then that's a marathon. So most most people pick it up later in life for various reasons, but I like that word that you used was sacrifice, because that is really what is going to be the pinnacle of like, or the determining factor of whether or not you reach your potential as an athlete. Like, how much are you willing to sacrifice consistently? It's not just about like, oh, I'm gonna train for this marathon and take a bunch of time off and then do it again next year. Like, no, it's like pretty much a lifestyle, and you have to be willing to kind of put in the work and to train the different systems over time.
Right. I mean, there's just so much that goes into it. And like you said, consistently training. And so that means consistently getting uncomfortable. And what I do think a lot of the times athletes will do, it's like, it's really exciting in the first couple of years that you get into running, right? Like you see improvements, and it is not that hard to see improvements, and you're constantly seeing times get faster and faster. And then most athletes will kind of reach this point where it's like, oh, like not every race is a PR, or like, oh my gosh, I don't feel like I'm making progress anymore. And so then they'll say, oh, I reached my limit, I peaked, and I hit several of those along the way. And it's like, okay, well, you can either stay stuck in that place, or you can say, okay, what are the things that I know I need to do? A lot of people don't want to look at the thing that they need to do. It's scary. Like it's hard. Even right now, it's like, I know what I would need to do to like reach the next level. And it's like, I don't know if like I'm willing to make that sacrifice. Right. And so you have to ask yourself, like, is it worth the sacrifice? And for some people, it might be running a few more days a week. It might be actually keeping your easy days easy. I don't know what level people are at. I don't know what that one thing is that you're not willing to do, or you just are so comfortable in where you're at. It's really uncomfortable to make changes consistently, because you get into this routine and this habit of, okay, this is what my run schedule looks like. This is what I do. I don't do this. I don't do that. And you like start creating these rules for yourself, and you get really comfortable. But what happens when you're comfortable is that you start to stagnate, and that's great if you're happy with that. But if you're trying to reach that next level and you're wondering like, why can I not break through? Oh, I've peaked, and you're saying that, but you're running 10-minute pace for a 5K. It's like, is that your peak, or is that what you're like willing to do with your training, right? So you really want to like ask yourself, what could I be doing to reach that next level? And it's not really fair that I'm like throwing out 10-minute pace for 5K. Even for myself, like I could say, hey, you know what? I haven't ran a 5K PR in a while. Like, what would I need to do to get back to running like 18:35K, right? Like, what would I need to do to be able to do that? And really being really like honest with yourself. I mean, there's certain things that like it's hard to like say I need to, hey,